Hello and welcome to Huff Goes to the Movies. My name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff. Some people know that I love going to the movies. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is in theaters now. The third Ant-Man film, the 31st film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the first film to kick off what is being called Phase 5 of the MCU. The film finds our heroes, Ant-Man, the Wasp, Hank Pym, Janet van Dyne, and Scott's daughter Cassie, being trapped in the quantum realm after Cassie builds a device that will send a signal into the realm. Once they're trapped there, they find themselves meeting the different people and civilizations that live there. And more importantly, they find themselves running into the big bad villain of the film and the big bad villain for the remainder of this saga of the MCU, Kang the Conqueror, played by Jonathan Majors. Now, going into this film, director Peyton Reed, who directed the first two Ant-Man films, said that he wanted to make a film that felt like a big Avengers-level event. Something akin to Captain America Civil War, which, even though it's titled Captain America, many people sort of view it as Avengers 2.5, since the plot revolves around several of the characters and their differences around the Sokovia Accords. What Peyton Reed wanted this film to be was the type of film that, even though it says Ant-Man and the Wasp on the title, it's the type of thing that you go into and it feels like walking out of it, there are these sort of earth-shattering, universe-shattering revelations and plot reveals, things of that nature. And I can say that in that spirit, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania does not feel like the previous two Ant-Man films, which Peyton Reed also directed. This one definitely takes on a more sci-fi fantasy feel to it as opposed to the other films, which felt more like heist films that involved superheroes. Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania wastes no time going sort of right into the main section of the story. We do get some background about what Scott Lang has been up to since the events of Avengers Endgame. We do get sort of reintroduced to Cassie, who in the previous films we saw just as a small child, but now she's being played by Kathryn Newton, which is actually a recast from Emma Fuhrmann, who played the character in Avengers Endgame. But we waste no real time at all. The movie is not going for very long before they're trapped in the quantum realm. And so we really do spend the overwhelming majority of this film in this big, fantastical, weird sort of sci-fi landscape. It really is sort of comparable to any Star Wars film. It really does give that feeling of us being in a different world and always running into new creatures, new characters, sort of new design choices, new weird things to look at. And the film is really built for you to admire that spectacle of this sort of universe that sits underneath our own. And to that end, I would have to commend Peyton Reed for wanting to take such a big swing with this Ant-Man film. I have no idea what the plans are for these characters going forward. I don't know if this will be the final Ant-Man film, but I do know that if this is going to be the last one, then I can at least respect the fact that Peyton Reed wanted to make as big of a film as he could for this final outing. But despite the great intentions, despite the very clear influences of big science fiction fantasy, most notably Star Wars, which I should probably add, Peyton Reed has spent some time in the Star Wars universe. He directed the season 2 finale of the Star Wars series The Mandalorian, which streams on Disney+. So I can only imagine what an experience like that meant for him as a filmmaker and probably a lifelong Star Wars fan. So for him to be able to get an opportunity to sort of play in that lane for a feature-length film, listen, hey, most filmmakers will never get an opportunity like that, so I definitely respect the decision to want to go big. But this might be hyperbole now, as the film just came out and I am just, sort of getting home from the theater from seeing it, but Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is awful. That's about as plain as I can state it. I found it to be an awful film. I had a terrible experience with it. I did not find myself engaged. I found myself looking at my watch through most of the film. It just felt like it would never end. And I think I'm comfortable saying at this point that it might be the worst film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But let's dig a little bit deeper. So, the first Ant-Man film, as I said in my review a few days ago, was originally co-written and meant to be directed by Edgar Wright. One of the things that attracted Edgar Wright to the Ant-Man character was that he could take something that felt somewhat grounded in the real world. Yes, he has the ability to shrink and grow, but he really wanted to focus on something that felt grounded. He wanted to sort of play with the potential absurdity of real life. And in casting someone like Paul Rudd, someone who sort of naturally is able to make light of a lot of situations, he seemed like a really good fit for it. But as the Marvel Cinematic Universe was starting to expand, and as there was this need to try and connect the films to tell one large story, Edgar Wright decided that he didn't want to think about the rest of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He just wanted to make an Ant-Man film, so he left the film over those creative differences. Peyton Reed was brought on, and I think that for all the controversy that preceded him, he found a really good balance in making a film that was able to be a somewhat grounded, low-stakes comedy, but he was also able to incorporate a lot of the superhero elements with it, and he was also able to make just enough ties to the MCU to make this feel like it belonged there. With the second film, Ant-Man and the Wasp, I feel like Peyton Reed just didn't quite have a full grasp of how to take these characters and continue that story in a way that felt meaningful. I appreciate that in Ant-Man and the Wasp, they still do rely on a lot of the characters and a lot of the comedy from the first film to try and tell that story, but it just feels like it's missing something. It just feels like there is a lack of urgency, at least on the part of Scott Lang, when it comes to everything else involved in that film. With Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, everything here just feels wildly out of place. So it's not just that it's one bad decision. It feels like every decision is the wrong decision. Whether it is taking characters like this and putting them in a sci-fi fantasy, whether it is taking a villain like Kang the Conqueror and putting him up against Ant-Man, of all people, or whether it's the inclusion of MODOK. And I know that some people may not know who MODOK is, but because they've put him in the trailers, because they've put him in the marketing, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that MODOK is one of the other antagonists of the film. And without saying too much about MODOK, it just didn't work. Nothing about that character works. The tone of that character does not fit with the tone of Kang the Conqueror. His goal as a character seems just so tired and so old, especially compared to what it is that Kang the Conqueror is trying to achieve here. And the use of visual effects for that character are ill-conceived and underdone. Now, yes, for people who read Marvel Comics, they know that MODOK is going to be a tough sell in live action. They know that MODOK looks weird, and that's part of the appeal in the comics. But here, it just feels like they took the laziest approach with trying to bring MODOK from the page to the screen. And the fact that that character is not even all that interesting, sort of in the context of this plot, just adds insult to injury. I think that Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is one of those films that we might look back on and say, oh, this sort of set up a lot of things that could pay off down the line, or that probably will pay off down the line. But the actual experience was just so grating. And I think this movie commits the biggest sin that any superhero movie could. It's just not interesting. I was bored out of my mind for so much of this movie. My wife looked over at me at several points in this film and thought, it can't keep going, can it? Like, it's got to end at some point, which is a tragedy. This film is 2 hours and 5 minutes long, and it felt like we were there for 3.5. as the MCU has grown and as they've hit these different milestones with their interconnected story, they have really struggled to find ways to keep developing these characters. Scott Lang is introduced in Ant-Man, and he's a likable guy. A likable choice to play alongside characters like Iron Man and Captain America and Thor. And his involvement in films like Avengers Endgame are really, really good balances to some of those more stronger personalities. But here, it just feels aimless. It just feels soulless. And nothing here, and there's a lot of plot, but nothing here really seems to stick with you. It all feels like fluff. It all feels like, yeah, just put these people on a green screen and let the VFX do what they do. It looks like Star Wars. It sometimes feels like Star Wars, but it doesn't have any of the soul or any of the thrill that made even some of the worst Star Wars movies watchable. And I just can't help but think that part of the issue here comes in the form of the script. I think that the script has some really key structural issues. From how the script handles Kang, how it treats the threat that he potentially poses, it just gets really repetitive, it gets really tired before we are actually given the proper introduction to him. And I had to check my watch a few times with how much time was going by in this film before we were sort of properly introduced to Kang and started to really understand what he actually meant as a threat to our heroes. And, you know, credit to Jonathan Majors in that role. I think that he really does attempt to elevate a lot of the material that he's given. I like how he plays this character. I like that he plays him mostly as this sort of quiet menace. You know, he doesn't have to really scream and yell to really get the point across that, no. You do not want to be on this guy's bad side. And when he does need to turn up, I think that he's really good in those scenes. But everything around him and what he's actually given just is not very strong. And a great actor can only do so much with the material that they're given. So yeah, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania to me is a huge miss. I think it might be the worst film in the MCU. I almost feel like I don't care about what the other movies do now. Just, I'll watch them. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Marvel Comics, as you can tell from the poster behind me. I've been reading Marvel Comics since I was a child, so the fact that we're getting movies with MODOK, Kang the Conqueror, and Stature, that's nuts. Like, that is, we are truly spoiled to be getting these characters adapted into big budget, feature-length, live-action films. But the movies themselves, they have to be good. They have to be worth a damn. And I just think that this film misses on so many levels. The world building of the quantum realm even just feels so lazy, so rehashed. It feels like we've been here before. Maybe not in the MCU, but just I think back to the world building of the Black Panther films. I think back to the world building that we get in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, and it feels like those worlds have so much more personality and so much more character to them and so much more care and craft. And this is a film that I think really misses all of those marks by pretty wide margins. The only other thing I guess I could say is that what this film's saving grace could have been, what this film's two saving graces could have been, is the fact that the Ant-Man films up to this point have been heist films. And I think that the heist element here feels so forgotten, so shoehorned. Like, oh right, these have always been heist films, so let's put a heist element in the plot and that'll be that. But the way that it's handled, it just feels really lazy. It's almost like they wanted to completely abandon that element that made the first two films work for so many people. And then, of course, when it comes to our characters, Scott's relationship with Cassie has been a driving force in his character development all the way from the first film. Without saying too much, it just feels like that dynamic was something that was not made a priority this time. Yes, it's there, but it just feels so surface level and so shallow, which is a shame considering that Paul Rudd and Kathryn Newton are both really good actors, and I think that, you know, Kathryn Newton in this role, this could take her as an actress to the next level of her career, and I just feel like that relationship is given very little substance, very little, you know, sort of meat for anyone to chew on. And then when it comes to where I think the character work is sort of given the most attention, it's in the character of Janet van Dyne, Michelle Pfeiffer, whose character has been trapped in the quantum realm for 30 years. But the way that the plot conveniently tries to handle how she speaks about her experiences there, and why is this now the first time that she's telling anyone about Kang the Conqueror or any of the civilizations in the quantum realm, it feels like a missed opportunity to try to add some depth to the family relationship that is Hope, Hank, Janet. It just feels like one long series of continued missed opportunities for this film. And when you add the fact that the spectacle is not that spectacular, it just really sours the entire thing. I truly, truly disliked this film and pretty much everything about it. It's great to look at Michelle Pfeiffer for 2 hours, but I could also do that with any other movie she's been in. And I've probably said enough at this point. I don't want to say anything that might spoil it, but I suppose because this is a Marvel film, I should also add that there are 2 after credit scenes. There's one that happens in the middle of the credits. There's one that happens at the very end. One of those feels like a setup for movies that are coming much later down the line. The other one feels like it has a bit more, I don't want to say urgency, but it feels like we might see the payoff to that much sooner. So if you're someone who is following the MCU, you'll definitely want to stick around for both of those. But overall, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania sucks. It's an awful movie. I can't believe we're at a point now where we feel like we need to sit through movies so that we can understand other movies and TV shows. But honestly, if I knew that I would have such a terrible experience with this film, I probably would have just waited for new rock stars to break it down. And for all these reasons, I would have to give Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania 1 out of 5 stars. But listen, that's just me. I've seen the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and it seems like people are much kinder to this film than I am. And hey, listen, I respect it. If you're a fan of Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I want to hear from you. Join me in the comments below. Let me know what you're thinking about Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. How does it compare to the rest of the MCU? How do you think it compares to the other Ant-Man films? Does it leave you more excited for the future of the MCU? If you like this video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon. That way you can stay up to date on everything that I've got going on here at Huff Goes to the Movies. Thank you so much. It's greatly appreciated. Also, I recently started a playlist on my channel for all my MCU reviews. If it's not being linked here above my head, I will for sure have a link to it in the description below so you can check all of those reviews out. Thank you for all your support. It means the world to me. Once again, my name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff. Stay sweaty, my friends. I will see you at the movies. Peace.